welcome everyone. My name is Liz Burton-Crow. I'm the Director of Education for the Carrillo Center for Nonviolence. Welcome back to Living One, our free monthly webinar series where presenters from around the world share their vision about psychology, life, and culture in the absence of animal exploitation. Through Living One, we ask the question, we know what's wrong, but what does right look like? Today, we're featuring Margo DeMello, who received her degree in cultural anthropology from UC Davis in 1995 and currently teaches at Canisius College in the Anthrozoology Master's Program. Margo is the outgoing program director for animal-human studies at Animals and Society Institute and the past president of the House Rabbit Society. She also volunteers for Harvest Home Animal Sanctuary. A talented and prolific author, Margo has penned numerous books, including Why Animals Matter, The Case for Animal Protection, Teaching the Animal, Human-Animal Studies Across the Disciplines, and most recently, Mourning Animals, Rituals and Practices Surrounding Animal Death. In addition to her writings on non-human species, Margo is a body art aficionado, publishing Bodies of Inscription, A Cultural History of the Modern Tattoo Community in the year 2000 through Duke University Press. And I've also heard a rumor that she is a grand rabbit poobah and also a highly crafty knitter. So welcome to you, Margo. Let me unmute you here. And then interviewing Margo today is going to be our very own Dr. Gabe Bradshaw, who is the founder and director of the Carrillo Center for Nonviolence. So welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, Margo.
Hi, Getty.
Yeah, just to start off with, and to situate you in the minds and the sort of the landscape of our topic, can you just give sort of a little journey, a story of your arc in your work with both human and animal rights, or just a general arc and how you have evolved over that time and the kinds of things that have been important to you?
I think that my story maybe sounds a bit like other people's story from my sort of generation, in that I'm trying to sort of frame this. I always loved animals. I always cared about animals. I stopped eating animals when I was a kid. But when it came time to, go to college and decide what you're going to do, there was not even the slightest idea in my head that I could ever do anything regarding animals for my career. That just seemed, I thought, and I think a lot of people, like I said, of my generation thought that if you want to do something with animals, you had to be a veterinarian, which I didn't think was suited to me. And I didn't even frankly know about ethology or, any of those fields. So, once I got into anthropology, and now I'm in graduate school and I still have to decide what I'm going to do. And at that time, and this is the 90s, the expectation for most cultural anthropologists was to leave and do field work in a third or fourth world country, for at least a year. And by that time, I was already heavily involved in animal rescue, and it didn't seem like I could really leave the country to do research anywhere else. So you'd think at that point I would have been thinking, well, could I study something about animals or animal rescue or animal rights? And again, that didn't occur to me. I didn't know the field. Nobody I knew the field, which was just then starting, just then getting a name. So I ended up doing my doctoral work on tattooing, which meant that I could stay local. I could do field work in the United States. I wouldn't have to worry about my animals. I wouldn't also have to worry about any dietary awkwardness working in another country. And it wasn't until I finished my work, got my PhD, was on the job market for a couple of years unsuccessfully, left academia, went to work at an animal rights organization that I finally ended up finding out about the field of human animal studies or anthrozoology, or what a lot of folks are calling animal studies now. And it just radically changed my life. The fact that I could somehow marry my scholarly training with the thing that I love the most, which is animals, it totally changed my life. So I've kind of been doing that for all of these years, for the last 15 or so years since I found out about the field. I don't do very much in terms of body modification work anymore. I just write and research on animal issues. I've also found that for me personally, having been an activist for a number of years, that this feels like a better fit for me. I'm not a person that enjoys confrontation. I'm not a person who is very good at talking to other people or trying to convince other people of anything. And so being able to sit in my pajamas at home and write and do research and teach it's a perfect fit for me. It's not animal rights, but it's a way that I feel like I can make an impact.
That's great. I have so many questions that just came up in that short storyline, but I'll try to pick away at them. You said that you don't consider that you're an activist, and you think that this work can be a contribution. In what way? Talk about that relationship. Your scholarship, I see that you're not in these narrow things. I think you're in many, many different positions and fields and things like that. But what is the role? Okay, I'll simplify. What is the role of academia as such? As right now, what is the role of academia when it comes down to animal issues and animal rights?
As somebody who's been trying to promote the growth of this new field, there's a way I think that I and people like me have sort of skirted around the question of activism and advocacy with being a scholar. And it seems to me that we've sort of passed this point where it's time to stop skirting around things. And I don't just mean for us, people who care about animals and study and write about animals, that it's time for everybody to kind of throw off the idea of objectivity in science and that we can't be advocates. I mean, that's kind of already been done. But at the same time, I feel like we are all, as kind of animals that live on this planet, have an obligation to just speak louder, maybe more than we ever did before, because things are at such an urgent kind of crisis level right now. Everybody still has to worry about jobs. You still have to worry about getting published. You still have to worry about all this stuff that's academics have to worry about. But at the same time, what's going on the planet is so we're just at a point now that it just seems like a lot of those kinds of worries that have, driven scholars and professionals and students for a long time, we kind of got to get away from that and just start to speak plainly about what's happening on the planet and what we can do about it. So, so I do see scholarship as clearly a way to help the planet, to help other species, to help our own species. It's still tricky. For somebody like me, I don't have a tenure track job. I don't really have to do anything to look like a normal scholar, because nobody really cares what I do. So I can kind of do what I want. But I feel like everybody's kind of moving in the same direction right now, which is there's no way that we can just hide behind some sort of veil of scholarly objectivity anymore.
So let me just dig a little bit into that. Is there something that has been intrinsic to the academic culture which is incongruent with activism? And what is that difference, and why is it difference? And the third part, that your answer may lead to is are we moving toward there's no difference between academia and activism as such?
I think that it's field specific. So the social justice fields, I don't want to make it seem like they've had it great. Everything from African American studies to the various flavors of feminist and the LGBTQ studies and all that. On the one hand, they're sort of free to be activists, and on the other hand, they're the ones that have had the target on their backs in terms of the public and in terms of right-wing complaints about academia and brainwashing our kids and all that kind of stuff. So on the one hand, I feel like in certain fields it's allowed for them to be activists, and on the other hand, that doesn't make their lives any safer. So I don't know. it seems like at the very least we can follow the model of the sort of the climate scientist folks who aren't afraid to take the science and say that we have to do something about this now. So I don't know if it's happening in general in academia. Everybody's scared. The political climate is so frightening right now, but I feel like, especially with young scholars, I feel like younger scholars in general, and now I'm just talking about the ones that I meet through this world, they're certainly less willing to not be open about their beliefs.
So wouldn't you say from, say, a cultural anthropological point of view, and I'm sort of keying off of Laura Nader, whom I met 20 years ago, who's she's a faculty, well, you know her, she was at Berkeley, and she's an anthropologist, and her brother is Ralph Nader, and one of their main areas of research and writing was looking at the anthropology of science, and she focused on physics in particular. But it was this notion of that there is an anthropology, in other words, there is a culture of academia. And the reason I'm pursuing this, which may sound a little arcane, is that I personally have felt, and I see that in the experiences of students that I work with, there's a kind of a counterforce to moving forward. There's a counterforce to, I'll be blunt, honesty and truth. And it's encased in the language, it's encased in kind of a threatening atmosphere of not going beyond what is already known, in a sense. So what would you say as a cultural anthropologist? Would you say that kind of characterizes, and that in a sense the upcoming generation may be really making a major change in how our epistemic authority functions?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to this might be seems sort of crazy, but to astrology, which actually I used to practice many years ago, and my generation, which is kind of the border between baby boomers and Gen X, was within the language of kind of new age spirituality, was known as the age of Aquarius, and so it was supposed to be my generation that was going to kind of usher in all of this unbelievable social change, partly because my generation was born at the time when all this social change was happening. Well, I don't know about the sort of the progress or the promise of my generation. It seems to me that what we're seeing with the in particular, not even millennials, but Gen X, the really younger, not Gen X, who are we talking about? The young ones today. At any rate, they seem to me to be the generation that's just kind of had it with the shit and is just gonna, I think if anybody's gonna make the kind of changes that we need to make, they're the ones that are gonna do it. Gen Z, I believe, is who we're talking about. That shows how old I am, that I have to struggle with who they are.
The youngins.
Right. So I don't know. I feel like that I mean, we're talking about such a new movement, whether we're talking about human animal studies or whether we're talking about the second wave of the animal rights movement, which really is also only since about the 1970s. We're talking about such a short, recent amount of time for the activist movement and also the scholarly field to sort of mature. And I just think there's multiple things going on. There's a drive for legitimacy, both within the animal rights movement, which I think is responsible for a lot of the legislative victories, but at the same time, that kind of push for kind of legitimacy and rationality and capitalism-based sort of solutions to a lot of the problems. I think all of that is important, but I kind of think that there's going to be something afterwards that is not going to be led by us that we're going to watch. And I think it's going to be led by young people who first off, because they're not going to be worried about the jobs and the security anymore, because all that's going to be gone. Nobody's going to have job security anymore, so they might as well just not worry about it like we all have. I don't know. I just think there's a lot of changes that are happening that I think also are going to challenge the sort of the way that we could have keep our movement separate. Well, I'm an animal rights activist. Well, I'm a feminist. Well, Black Lives Matter. And I think that that definitely does not do any of us a service, to keep these interests and to keep these issues separate. And I think they're going to kind of blend much better together with younger people who are, I think, a little bit less worried about the disciplinary boundaries and the movement boundaries that have, I think, held us back in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. So what you're really describing is this notion. Well, Charles Eisenstein, for example, is a young writer. And, he talks about, when one of his books, the new narrative, the new master narrative or whatever, as this completely different storyline, which is really our belief system and our mores that shape individuals and collective bodies. So I think that's the tension that I see is, like you were talking about, achieving legitimacy with the existing institutions and quote unquote power, while at the same time breaking down the necessity and the authority of those institutions. So I think that's a lot of the stuff that I see. Now, is there something about, you talked about that animals, that's it, we're not even, talk as a cultural anthropologist in terms of understanding the rights, the lives of animals, non-humans, from the perspective of this larger scale dynamic. Are they getting a voice? The science is showing, just for example, is demonstrated, what's intuitive is that they have the same brains and minds, that we do. There's a lot of work for personhood, the fact of untethering them from the oppression of capitalism and those kinds of models. What does that look like as a cultural anthropologist in terms of the potential participation, active participation as agents in shaping a new trans-species culture?
It's still super, super tricky. So, anthropology went through back in the 70s and 80s, this kind of, growing up time and this move towards self-reflexivity and away from objectivity and away from this idea that the white male or female, middle class, American or British anthropologists would go out and translate the cultures of other people for a white, middle class, American, British audience. So those days are gone, and they should be gone, because speaking for other people is no longer appropriate, which it should not be appropriate anymore. But when we come to non-human animals, it's still so problematic because we all continue to feel that we have to speak for them, that somebody has to speak for them because they don't speak our language. So this is where I think we get this weird scattershot approach to, well, who gets to speak for them now? Is it the the Western trained, say, biologists and conservationists? Should it be a Western skewing animal welfare and animal rights advocates? Should it be the people who most closely work and live with those animals, especially if we're talking about animals in other cultures? Or should there be a moving beyond that and back to this question of, well, how come they can't speak for themselves, and is there a better way to facilitate that through careful use of ethology and that kind of thing? And even then you've got translation, and so even then, who's going to be given the power and the privilege of being able to do that? So I don't know what to say about it, and I don't know what's going to happen with that. I feel like as long as everybody's fighting amongst each other about who gets to speak for them, then we're still in a troublesome position. So again, I think looking back at the history of anthropology, I think is useful, but it's still, we remain stuck with the inability of us to be able to conceive of other ways that they can speak for themselves so that they can be part of the conversation instead of the subject. I mean, it was so much, the work of activists to move them from object to subject, but they're still the subject of somebody's scholarship and somebody's activism and somebody's work. And how can we change that so that they're some kind of a partner at the table? And I don't know what the answer to that is, and I don't know. I don't have any idea.
Well, something that comes to mind is Vine Deloria Jr., who is a Sioux scholar, and he was very active in the 60s and 70s, well, until he died. And he wrote a book, or it was an essay, We Talk, You Listen. And I kind of wonder about that, in the sense of that is the paradigm in academia, in culture at large, at least explicitly, it may not be in practice, is that, like, for example, indigenous research methodologies, like Chalisa Bageli. So the point is that an anthropologist, a scientist, goes to a place and listens. That's the same like participatory action research, etc. So what about that? I mean, in other words, it's like the we talk, we listen, you talk, we talk, you listen. How about that being implemented? Because that has been the whole thing. And what would that look like?
Well, and what would that look like, I guess, is my question, because I'm still, we have to be trained to listen. And so there's sort of more the kind of the scientific ways of listening. We know the behavioral repertoire of the elephant, and so we can use that information to try to interpret what they're doing. But that's still trying to listen in a very particular way. And so a lot of the focus with the ethology and everything that we're learning from that, as much as it's changed with people like Mark Bekoff, it's still kind of a, the listening and the observing that's done through that model is still done in a way that is predefined. So the behaviors are going to be interpreted in a way that's based on what I already know through my school learning about the elephants, or whatever that is. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it almost goes back to a little bit of the kind of when the ethics of care kind of emerged as kind of a challenge to the Reagan and Singer kind of rights focus, that very rational kind of way that we can try to explain and justify that other species can, deserve rights. And then with the ethics of care and all the different sort of movement out of ecofeminism that was like, well, wait a minute, maybe that's not the only way to do this. Maybe we can go back to emotion, even though it's been challenged, and the fact that women have been so involved in the field, and women's work in the field, as in every other field, is devalued in part because of the reliance on emotion. So I feel like it's a little bit kind of that, which is, we want to listen, but how do we train ourselves to listen? And again, through what lens and through what model? Because the lens is never neutral. And I still don't know what that is yet. I feel like this is the promise of kind of multi-species ethnography. It hasn't been realized yet, but I think the promise is there of this new way of watching and listening and observing that maybe can tell us something different.
So I'm gonna make a big jump based on that. If this trajectory continues in some fashion, what do you see a society that recognizes humans, that I would say allows and recognizes participation, full participation by non-humans? How do you see life looking like for humans and animals? I mean, these are just little snapshot ideas. What does that look like?
Right.
Not so much how to get there,
right.
or maybe you've started us on that path of how to get there, how we're moving there. But what would that look like, or what is examples of what that might look like when we get there? In 5 words or less.
Yeah. I don't know, because we can start by looking at people's homes. What would domestic life look like in a slightly different model, in a model where everyone within that household gets to play some kind of a role in the decisions that are made in that household? And I could just look at my household, which is a couple of humans, some chihuahuas, some rabbits, some cats, and a bird. And it already looks decent in the sense that it's dirty. So I feel like that sort of indicates that somebody else's desires maybe are get to play a bigger role in our household. But if it was truly, if this house was truly set up so that every individual in it had kind of equal say in how things happen, I'm not sure how feasible it would be for the humans to live in this house that well. So this is where I'm having a hard time. I'm trying to start with a household where we can shape what life looks like for all the participants in it, and even that I'm having a hard time coming up with what the ideal version looks like, so that everybody has their rights and everyone has their desires kind of respected and honored at all times. I'm just having a hard time trying to see what that looks like.
Okay, well, take it one more step. So in your home, if things were all possible, you know what I mean, in the sense of that they're realistic. But what are some of the sticking points in terms of you increasing the ability or you dropping or shifting the impediments to your non-human family members having greater participation?
Right.
What are those kinds of things? I mean, these are just examples to kind of, you know, what are things that you're encountering or that that are encountered?
Right. I mean, you and I have sort of talked about this in the past and have also written about this, how a household can be set up in a way that everybody in it has more possibilities for freedom. And certainly for the rabbits, over all the years that I've lived with rabbits, I've really sort of strived to do that. And I feel like if they had a chance to, have an exit interview, kind of when it's all done, about how did you like living in that house for all those years, they'd be like, yeah, it was actually pretty good, but could have been better. I guess that would be an okay sort of judgment at the whole thing. I don't know. I'm really struggling for some reason with this question, and I know it's an important question. What should the world look like? Something that you and I have talked about in the past is, let's say everybody did stop eating animals. What would that look like? Where would all the animals go? Would we? All of these kind of what's possible, what might happen. I don't know. It's so hard for me. As much as I like to think about the ways that that this world could look and operate differently. It's hard to actually come up with what that would look like. And I'm having a hard time even doing it within my home. I wanted to start with my home and then go out of the home, but I can't even get out of my home yet. I'm still not there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think what I'm trying to say is, let's just use the dogs as an example. I have 6 Chihuahuas. They are dependent on us in every possible way because of the way that Chihuahuas have been bred and some of the reasons that they've been bred the way that they have. And so what we're left with is a set of animals who are 1,000% dependent on us, who cannot survive without us. And that just brings up so many more terrible practical and ethical questions about how do we make a world that is good and fair to animals who maybe shouldn't be here after all is said and done. Mm-hmm. Should we have chickens anymore? If we're not dependent on chickens anymore to eat or to lay eggs for us, should we have these birds that have been so intensively bred that they have so many physical problems, and that they're the possibility for we know what a possibility of a free and happy life for a chicken looks like. We've all been to an animal sanctuary, but those lives are few and far between. Should chickens live in a world where we're not eating them anymore? And if so, how and where are they going to live? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see, based on that, the idea of sanctuary? How or rescue center sanctuaries. The sanctuary is more of a semi-permanent type of situation. How do you see that? Again, I want you to put your, cultural anthropology hat on in terms of, do you envision it as sanctuaries as a critical agent in terms of catalyzing change from a cultural point of view?
Right. I mean, I do think that they have been, in terms of the numbers of animals that they've saved, it's obviously the tiniest little drop in the bucket. They're just, the sanctuary model is not, I don't think, ever going to be set up to deal with the animals that need that kind of help. But as an educational tool, certainly, I think that is really important. I wonder if that's going to be changing a little bit, though, as fewer people, as we can get some of those needs met that we would have gotten from visiting a big farm animal sanctuary, that we could then just watch the videos on TV. But then it's still serving the same educational goal. I don't know. I wonder if the sanctuary model is going to change to, instead of these large sanctuaries that we all see and know, if it's going to end up as just these smaller little micro sanctuaries that all over the place, that if everybody just has two, then that might ultimately take care of the problem. But I don't know if it will either. And I guess even just the sanctuary rescue group model is one that maybe we're going to have to outgrow as well, where we've sort of got the kind of the idea of the quote unquote adoptable animals that stay on this pipeline where they go in and out of homes until hopefully they find the one that sticks, and then the sanctuary model for all the ones that can't make it through that pipeline. I understand how the sanctuary model emerged alongside of the rescue group and shelter model to fit the, to take in these cases that can't make it through the normal model. But I don't know. I just from a numbers perspective, it's not going to do enough good. On the one hand, we look at the companion animals, who we can all acknowledge are the ones that have the best treatment of any animal, non-human, around the world. But that model and that good treatment comes from the fact that we have, turned this group of animals into surrogate family members. And the fact that they're called surrogate family members as opposed to just family members means they are only surrogate family members. So as soon as we have our own kids, and those ones can be moved out. So, the idea of family, I think, probably needs to be expanded in some ways so that the term surrogate doesn't kind of spill off. So if we want to still, and if we think we're still going to have companion animals, there's got to be some way that they're redefined so that they're not just, kind of a not perfectly fitting member of our family, but that they're fully members of our family. I think that would help, but then that's still going to be the boundary between those animals and everyone else. So I'm sure.
What would that be? Just finish that last in terms of this other part of the equation. So you're talking about a redefinition and re-envisioning of companion animals or
a family, so when we think about what other humans we care about, we all have these, these nested sort of circles that we're within. There's me in the middle, there's my human family. In my case, I include my animal family in with my human family, so that's the inner circle. Then we go out a little bit to extended family, then we go out a little bit to community, then we go out a little bit to state, nation state, so we've all got these different levels of allegiance. And so family always is the one that's closest to you. And so on the one hand, if we expand family to include the companion animals rather than as surrogates, then at least they're more in that first level. But on the other hand, that doesn't take care of anybody else. If there's some way that we could expand family, and I know this isn't practical, but if we could expand family to not just include companion animals, but everybody, so all other animals and all other people, so that we don't already have, and again, this is probably not practical in any way, even as a conceptual device, but rather than the us and them that we've constantly got set up when we begin with who's in and everybody else is out, what if everybody was in? What if I could care equally about a child dying in Syria to I can about a child dying in the United States to I can about a cow dying in the United States. What if it was possible to care the same about all of those groups without the us versus them at all? Because if we already have a group that we're prepared to protect with all of our, everything that we have, and nobody else deserves that level of protection, what would happen if we just kept pushing that line out? I don't know.
So what does that do? Keep going with that. What does that do in terms of identity, human identity? So
right.
You just moved into that area of essentially
right.
A recrafting of human identity.
Right. So to me, the human-animal border, however it's defined, it's already artificial, and we already know that from all the science that it's already artificial. But clearly that's not how most people think. So just expanding one line to include somebody in it that didn't get included in it before is already jarring. But again, we've been sort of trying to do that with humans already, in different ways for hundreds of years. Like, well, those humans weren't included before, but we probably got to fit them in now. So let's do that. And that was probably jarring. And we know it was jarring. And we just look at our own history to see that. So I think it's not the fact that we've done it already a few times and that we're still struggling to do it with people means that it's kind of doable. It's not easy, but it's kind of doable. But yeah, eventually we're talking about obviously whole new set of laws. But that sort of the conceptualization of what it means to be human and what it means to be part of a family and what it means to be part of a community and what it means to be somebody that's worth consideration. We've been already pushing that, and there's been major pushback against that, and so there's no reason to not keep doing that. People are going to be uncomfortable just letting Black people in. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the what you're also talking about is, like you talked about earlier, multicultural. So it's essentially shifting again species from multi-species to multicultural.
Which I think is just such an important thing we have to attend to now. In this kind of stage of my life, I guess I'm starting to feel like, it's one thing to say as a white, female, Western, animal advocate. It's one thing to say that I'm an ally to other people, but it's another thing to kind of walk the walk. And I feel like for me right now, this is something I'm really, really concerned about, is not just for practical reasons, expanding the kind of the community of animal activists as well as scholars to include non-white people, but as a basic kind of a human problem, I am just much more concerned than I ever have been before about other humans on this planet, and also the fact that if we are being truthful in saying that we want other people to be involved in our movement, that we need to do some serious work to get them in and to make it welcome for them. Because everything that we see from the perspective of Western animal advocates going after practices that are engaged in by non-Western people or by minorities, all we continue to do is push those groups away and reassert our supremacy. And I just can't kind of participate in that anymore.
So when you were talking about, you're really talking, when you're describing about this notion of caring as much for a child in Syria as a cow in North Dakota, I forgot where the cow was living. What you're really talking about is, again, what is described in other cultures in quantum mechanics is non-dualism, where there is no form. This sounds arcane, but this is what we're left with. Where form is not that important. Form is just an expression of something that comes out of unity. So that being the case, in terms of how do you actually handle that psychologically, practically, whatever, then aren't we really also, if we're going to really move into that we are having to have a different relationship with place and body? And in other words, right now we're sort of smeared out over the entire globe in terms of connection, in terms of caring, which is good, but at the same time, from a, like you say, from a practical point of view, how does that function? And what I think that suggests is kind of a contraction into place, which does not mean drawing barriers, but
Right.
working within that particular body space, which is really what we are. So I guess I see that that's a tension point in terms of changing from a cultural perspective, eliminating things that are barriers, that are impediments to others. I'm saying right now non-human animals and plants, and becoming much more engaged in the physical locality of the planet. Do you have thoughts on that? Yes, no, all of the above?
I don't know, because part of it is that I think people can be more effective as advocates if they attend to, their own neighborhood, let's say. I will not, advocate against killing dogs for meat in China. It's not. We've got enough things on our plate that we can clean up, and so I mean, I hear what you're saying. We're not trying to put up borders like, I'm not going to help your problems and you're not going to help mine. That's not it. But animal advocate has become a tool of cultural hegemony. It's another way for us to assert our supremacy over other people when we go into other cultures and demand that they change their animal practices, which by and large affect just a tiny percentage of the animals that are affected by our animal practices. So I'm not trying to get to, again, the us and them, well, your stuff, my stuff, your stuff, my stuff, so much as I am sort of struggling today. Part of, I think that the idea behind today's talk was, walking the walk. What does walking the walk look like? But as I've been thinking about it since I saw those questions from you guys, I think about myself in particular as struggling. It's not walking the walk, it's literally struggling. It's trying to find what's the right thing to do right now. So I know what the right thing to do for me personally is in terms of, how I eat and how I live. But I think once we get out of ourselves, it's a much more fraught conversation. And so what does walking the walk look like? For me, it's like sort of struggling for where do I put every foot? What's the right move to make? I'm not
say that's I mean, in some ways I can see that that's just where we're at. What you're describing is that instead of the quick fix or making things like, okay, now we know this, we can do that, you're really talking about maybe the internal struggle, the physical, et cetera, struggle as a sign of the times and a kind of a necessary element, perhaps.
Well, I think it's sign of the times, but it's also just not wanting to sort of step wrong. I feel like we also have a responsibility, especially, for those of us who have a little bit of a public, reputation, to not screw up. There's this whole thing now, the okay boomer thing, the boomers have destroyed the planet and everything else, which is all true. And I'm going to pretend that I'm Gen X instead of boomer so that I can escape that stigma. But, it's not really working. I know that that's kind of on me. But that's the thing, is that we're responsible for a lot of shit. And so it's hard to just, for me, it's hard. My identity, I guess, is sort of shifting and changing a little bit because I don't want to by remaining as focused on animals as I kind of have been through at least the last 15 odd years of my career and my life, I don't want to have the blinders on that I think blinds so many of us to what's going on with our fellow humans. And it's super simplistic to say we're all in this together, but we kind of are. So I don't know. It's both the time that we're in right now, but it's also, like I said, things are urgent. They're urgent for animals, but they're also urgent for people, and they're also urgent for the planet. So what do we do, and what kind of action do we take in our lives, and what kind of people do we want to work with to change what's happening? And for me, it's a constant open question that I'm negotiating. This is partly why I love teaching. So right now I'm teaching a course at Canisius on animal protection as a social movement. And so what we've been doing this last couple of weeks, for instance, is looking at strategies. And we're looking at sort of some of the more controversial strategies, the home demos, the a lot of the PETA campaigns, both the ones that use the, women's bodies, but also the Holocaust on Your Plate campaign and the slavery campaigns. And how do we enter into discussions like that? How do we talk about what happens to billions of chickens every year on this planet without not just dragging somebody else's suffering into it, but in a way that could even just be read as belittling other people's suffering? And even if we know that that might not be true or that the comparisons are accurate, I don't want to go there anymore. And so this is what I like about my class, is that we can talk about all this. Wow, I can kind of see how that's something that they might have thought would be effective, but look at all the ways that it is really troubling. And what's the result we're looking at? Is the result that we're looking at, let's say, to improve the lives of chickens, or is the result that we're looking at a better planet for all of us? And will getting to those things be the same? Will maybe it be a little slower to get to chickens have a decent life on this planet if we bring everybody else into it and make sure that all humans have a better life at the same time? Will it be slower? Yeah, probably, but will it be better that way? That's sort of what I'm thinking.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Margo. Looks like we're right at our 45-minute, a little bit over mark. So yeah, thank you so much. Amazing food for thought. I'm still pondering, how do we speak with instead of for animals in my own work? So I think that's a really valuable question. And also, what is the definition of family? So definitely a lot to mull over after we're done here. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here. So thank you very much, Margo, and thank you, Gabe Bradshaw.